The rain came down like bullets that night. David Chen wiped his glasses for the third time as he pedaled his old bike through the empty streets. His shift at the electronics repair shop had ended 2 hours ago, but he still had to finish his second job at Tony's 24-hour mart. Working 18 hours a day was killing him slowly, but David had no choice. The rent was due in 3 days, and he was still $40 short. His landlord wasn't the understanding type. Last month, when David was late with payment, the man had stood outside his door for an hour, banging and shouting threats that made the neighbors peek through their curtains. The storm hit harder as David turned into the industrial area. This part of town looked like a graveyard at night. Abandoned warehouses, broken streetlights, and empty lots filled with rusted metal and weeds. Most people avoided this route, but David took it every night because it cut 15 minutes off his ride home. Time was money, and he had precious little of either. Thunder crashed overhead, and David pulled under a concrete overpass to wait it out. His phone showed 11:47 p.m. In 6 hours, he'd have to be back at the repair shop. Sleep felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. That's when he heard it. A voice calling through the rain. "Faint, desperate, barely human. Help, please. Someone help me." David looked around. The voice seemed to come from the old warehouse across the street. The building had been empty for years, its windows boarded up and covered in graffiti. Who would be in there at this hour? He should keep riding. Smart people minded their own business in this neighborhood, but the voice came again, weaker this time. David had always been too soft for his own good. His mother used to say it would get him in trouble someday. Looks like someday was tonight. David left his bike under the overpass and ran across the street. The warehouse door hung open, creaking in the wind like something from a horror movie. He pulled out his phone's flashlight and stepped inside. The smell hit him first, damp concrete, rust, and something else. Fear, maybe. His light cut through the darkness, revealing broken machinery and piles of debris. Then he saw her. A young woman sat chained to a thick metal support beam in the center of the room. Her clothes looked expensive once, a silk blouse and designer jeans, but now they were torn and muddy. Her long black hair stuck to her face, and her eyes reflected his phone light like a trapped animal's. "Oh my God," David whispered, rushing toward her. "What happened to you?" The woman looked up at him with disbelief, as if she'd given up hope of rescue. You're real? Please tell me you're real." "I'm real. I'm going to get you out of here." David examined the chains around her wrists. They looked industrial grade, the kind used to secure heavy equipment. "Who did this to you?" I can't remember everything clearly." Her voice shook from cold and fear. "There were men. They grabbed me outside a coffee shop downtown. After that, it's all fuzzy. They must have drugged me." David felt anger rise in his chest. What kind of animals would do this to another human being? He knelt beside her and opened his small toolbox. Working as a repair technician meant he always carried basic tools. "What's your name?" he asked, using pliers to work on the chain links. "Elena," she said quietly. "Elena Rodriguez." "I'm David. Don't worry, Elena. We're going to get you out of here." The chains were tougher than they looked. David's hands were cramping, and his tools weren't really meant for this kind of work. But desperation gave him strength. After 20 minutes of careful work, the first chain snapped free. Elena gasped and rubbed her wrist where the metal had cut into her skin. "I can't believe this is happening." "Thank you." "Thank you so much." "Save the thanks until we're out of here," David said, working on the second chain. Those men might come back. The thought made them both move faster. When the last chain broke, Elena nearly collapsed. David caught her and helped her stand. She was shaking all over. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "I don't know. Yesterday? Maybe longer." Elena leaned against him heavily, everything spinning. David only had half a sandwich left from his dinner break, but he gave it to her without hesitation. He also wrapped his jacket around her shoulders. It wasn't much, just a thin windbreaker, but it was all he had. "My apartment isn't far," he said. "Can you walk?" Elena nodded, though she didn't look steady on her feet. They made their way out of the warehouse together, David supporting most of her weight. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the wind still cut through their clothes like ice. David's bike wasn't built for two people, but somehow they managed. Elena sat on the crossbar while David pedaled slowly through the wet streets. She didn't complain, even when the bike hit potholes that jarred them both. His apartment building looked worse in the rain, peeling paint, broken windows, and a front door that barely hung on its hinges. David felt embarrassed bringing Elena here. Even in her current state, she seemed too refined for this place. "It's not much," he said, helping her up 3 flights of stairs. "But it's warm and dry." David's studio apartment was exactly 340 square feet. He knew because the landlord had mentioned it every time he raised the rent. A bed that folded down from the wall, a tiny kitchen, and a bathroom smaller than most closets. His entire life fit into this box. Elena looked around without judgment, which surprised him. Most people took one look at his place and made excuses to leave quickly. "You take the bed," David said, pulling it down from the wall.
"I'll sleep on the floor. I can't take your bed."
"You've already done so much. You're injured and traumatized. I'm not letting you sleep on the floor." David found his only spare blanket and pillow. No arguments. Elena sat on the edge of the bed and looked at him with something like wonder. "Why are you helping me?" "You don't even know me." The question caught David off guard. Why was he helping her? He thought about it for a moment. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said finally. "Because someone needed help and I was there." "Isn't that enough?" Elena stared at him for a long moment, and David thought he saw tears in her eyes. "You have no idea how rare that is." "What do you mean?" "Nothing. I'm just grateful. More grateful than you'll ever know." David made Elena a cup of hot tea with honey, the last of his good tea bags. As she sipped it, color slowly returned to her face. She kept touching her left wrist as if something important was missing there. "We should call the police in the morning," David said. "Report what happened." Elena tensed immediately. "No, please, not yet. I need time to think, to remember more clearly. Those men, they might have connections. I don't know who to trust." David didn't fully understand her fear, but he respected it. "Okay, but we need to get you checked by a doctor. You might have a concussion." "I feel better already, really." Elena pulled his jacket tighter around herself. "Thank you, David. For everything." As Elena fell asleep, David lay on his thin blanket and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: missing work, spending money he didn't have on food for 2 people, figuring out how to help someone whose problems seemed bigger than anything he'd ever faced. But for the first time in months, David felt like he'd done something that mattered. Something more important than fixing broken phones or stocking shelves. He'd saved another person's life tonight. He had no idea that the woman sleeping in his bed was worth more money than he'd see in 10 lifetimes, or that helping her would change both their lives forever. David woke up to the smell of coffee. Real coffee, not the instant stuff he usually drank. He sat up from his makeshift bed on the floor, confused and sore. For a moment, he'd forgotten about Elena. She stood in his tiny kitchen, wearing his oversized clothes and looking much better than she had the night before. The color had returned to her face, and she'd managed to clean up using his small bathroom. "I hope you don't mind," she said, holding up his coffee maker. "I found this in your cabinet. You were sleeping so peacefully I didn't want to wake you." David rubbed his eyes and checked his phone. 7:30 a.m. He'd overslept by an hour, but somehow he felt more rested than he had in weeks. "You didn't have to do that," he said, standing and stretching his back. "Sleeping on the floor at 28 wasn't as easy as it used to be. It's the least I could do." Elena handed him a cup. The coffee was perfect, strong but not bitter. "You saved my life last night." David took a sip and nearly groaned with pleasure. "How did you make it taste so good?" "I use the same beans and it always comes out terrible." Elena smiled for the first time since he'd found her. "It's all about the water temperature and timing. Someone taught me when I was younger." She'd almost said something else, David noticed, but trauma could make people careful with their words. He didn't push. "I called in sick to work," David said. "First time in 2 years. My boss wasn't happy, but I figured you might need someone around today. You didn't have to do that. I feel much better." "Elena, you were chained up in a warehouse 12 hours ago. You're not going anywhere alone until we figure out what happened." The grateful look she gave him made David's chest feel warm. When was the last time someone had looked at him like that? Like he mattered? They spent the morning talking. Elena claimed she still couldn't remember much about the kidnapping, but she seemed sharp and intelligent. When David mentioned his repair business, her eyes lit up with interest. "What kind of electronics do you fix?" she asked. "Phones mostly. Some computers, small appliances. Whatever people bring me." David shrugged. "It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills." "Barely." Can I see your workspace? David hesitated. His repair setup was just a corner of his apartment with a folding table and a toolbox. It looked amateur compared to real repair shops. But Elena seemed genuinely curious. He showed her his collection of screwdrivers, his soldering iron, and the box of spare parts he'd collected over the years. Elena picked up a broken phone he'd been working on. The customer says it won't turn on, David explained. I think it's a battery issue, but I can't be sure without opening it up. Elena examined the phone carefully, running her fingers along the edges. Have you checked the charging port? Sometimes, debris gets stuck in there and prevents proper connection. David blinked. I actually know. I usually assume it's the battery first. Elena found a tiny piece of lint stuck deep in the charging port. She used one of David's precision tools to remove it, then plugged the phone into the charger. It immediately showed a charging symbol. How did you know to check that? David asked, amazed. Elena looked surprised by her own knowledge. I don't know. It just seemed obvious. Maybe I worked with electronics before whatever happened to me. Over the next few days, Elena's intuition about electronics proved incredible. She helped David diagnose problems that had stumped him for weeks. A laptop that wouldn't start just needed its RAM reseated. A tablet with a black screen had a loose display cable, simple fixes that David had missed. Word spread quickly in the neighborhood. David's customers started telling their friends about the miraculous improvement in his repair skills. His phone rang constantly with new jobs. I can't believe this, David said on Thursday evening, counting the day's earnings. I made more today than I usually make in a week. Elena smiled from her spot on his couch where she'd been organizing his receipts. You're a good technician, David. You just needed to look at problems differently. We're a good team, you mean? David looked at her seriously. I want to split this money with you. You're the one making all the difference. I don't need money, Elena said quickly. Having a safe place to stay is payment enough. It was an odd thing to say. Who didn't need money? But Elena had said several odd things over the past few days. She knew about business strategies that seemed advanced for someone who couldn't remember her past. She understood technology at a level that went beyond basic repair work. And sometimes, when she thought David wasn't looking, she stared out the window with an expression that seemed almost longing. On Friday night, David was working late on a particularly stubborn computer when Elena's phone rang. He didn't even know she had a phone until that moment. Hello? Elena answered, stepping onto the small balcony. But the apartment was tiny, and David could hear everything. Miss Rodriguez, we've been looking everywhere for you, a man's voice said. Professional. Urgent. I told you I need more time, Elena whispered back. It's not safe yet. Your father is becoming impatient. He's threatening to involve the authorities himself. No, absolutely not. If they get involved, everything becomes public. The kidnappers might panic and hurt someone else. David's hand stilled on his work. Kidnappers, plural? And who was her father? Miss Rodriguez, with respect, you've been missing for almost a week. The board is asking questions. The stock price is starting to fluctuate because of the rumors. Stock price? David's mind raced. What kind of family had stock prices that mattered? Give me one more week, Elena said. Please. I'm learning things here that I never could have learned before. Important things. Learning things? Miss Rodriguez, you're living in a... Don't say it, Elena cut him off. Don't you dare. This man saved my life when no one else even knew I was missing. He's shown me more genuine kindness in 5 days than I've seen in years. David felt his face flush. He shouldn't be listening to this, but he couldn't move away. I understand your gratitude, but this situation is becoming complicated. What if he discovers who you really are? He won't. And even if he did, David isn't like other people. He doesn't care about money or status. He cares about doing the right thing. The conversation ended, and Elena came back inside. David pretended to be absorbed in his work, but his mind was spinning. Who was Elena, really? And why did the sound of that phone call make him feel like their perfect little bubble was about to burst? Everything okay? He asked, trying to sound casual. Just old friends checking on me, Elena said. They worry too much. David nodded, but doubt crept into his thoughts for the first time since finding her. Elena had been nothing but helpful and kind, but something didn't add up. Her knowledge of electronics was too advanced. Her understanding of business was too sophisticated, and that phone call had sounded like something much bigger than friends checking in. That night, as Elena slept, David stared at the ceiling and wondered what he'd gotten himself into. Part of him wanted to ask Elena directly about the phone call, but another part was afraid of what he might learn. Some secrets, once revealed, changed everything, and David wasn't sure he was ready for their small, perfect world to change just yet. 2 weeks had passed since that stormy night, and David's life had completely changed. His repair business was booming like never before. Elena's insights had turned him from a struggling technician into the most sought-after repair guy in 3 neighborhoods. "Look at this," David said, holding up his phone excitedly. "Mrs. Patterson wants us to fix her entire home office setup. That's 12 devices total." Elena looked up from the laptop she was working on and smiled. "That's wonderful, David. You deserve all this success." "We deserve it," David corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." Elena's smile faltered slightly. David had noticed she did that sometimes when he talked about their partnership, like she felt guilty about something. But whenever he asked, she just said she was tired. The truth was, Elena felt like a fraud. Every day that passed made her deception worse. David believed she was just a lucky guess when it came to electronics, but Elena knew better. She had a master's degree in electrical engineering from MIT. She'd spent years learning about technology and business from some of the smartest people in the world. Watching David struggle with problems she could solve in seconds was torture. But every time she helped him, she saw his face light up with pride. He thought he was learning and growing as a technician. How could she tell him that she'd been basically cheating this whole time? "David," Elena said one evening as they finished up their work, "can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. We're way past keeping secrets, aren't we?" David said, not realizing the irony of his words. "What do you want from life? I mean, beyond just paying the bills?" David set down his screwdriver and really thought about it. "You know, before you showed up, I never really thought that far ahead. I was just trying to survive each day, but now?" He gestured around the apartment, which had become a proper workshop. "I'd love to have a real repair shop someday, maybe hire some employees. Help people fix their stuff instead of throwing it away." Elena's heart ached. David's dreams were so simple, so honest. In her world, people talked about buying islands or starting space companies. David just wanted to help his neighbors and make an honest living. "What about you?" David asked. "What did you want to be before everything happened?" Elena stared at her hands. In her real life, she was already everything she'd ever been expected to be. CEO in training at her father's company, board member of 3 charities, featured on magazine covers as one of the most powerful young women in business. But none of that had ever made her as happy as these past 2 weeks in David's tiny apartment. "I think I wanted to matter," she said quietly. "To make a real difference in people's lives. Elena, you saved my business. You've probably helped save dozens of families from expensive repair bills. How is that not making a difference?" If only he knew. Elena's family company made billions by creating products that people couldn't afford to repair. They built phones and computers designed to break after a few years, forcing customers to buy new ones. Everything David stood for was the opposite of her family's business model. That night, Elena's phone rang again. She'd been getting these calls every few days, each one more urgent than the last. This time she recognized the caller ID immediately. Her heart sank. "I have to take this," she told David, stepping outside onto the fire escape. "Elena, where the hell are you?" The voice belonged to her best friend from college, Victoria Chen. Well, her former best friend. In Elena's world, friendship often meant strategic networking. "Vic, I can't explain right now, but I'm safe." "Safe?" "Elena, you've been missing for 2 weeks. Your father has hired 3 different private investigation firms. There are rumors that you're dead, kidnapped, or having some kind of breakdown. Elena closed her eyes. She'd known this couldn't last forever, but she'd hoped for more time. I need you to tell my father I'm alive and unharmed, but I can't come back yet. Are you insane? Do you know what your disappearance is doing to the company? The stock dropped 12% last week. Investors are panicking. The company will survive without me for a few more days. Elena, listen to yourself. You sound different. What's happened to you? Elena looked through the window at David, who was patiently explaining to a customer over the phone why their tablet needed a specific type of repair. His face was kind, focused, completely genuine. I've learned what normal life feels like, Elena said. Normal life? Elena, you're worth $4 billion. Normal isn't an option for you. $4 billion. Elena had tried not to think about that number while living in David's world. David got excited about making $200 in a day. Her monthly allowance was more than David made in 5 years. Vic, I need more time. Time for what? To play house with some random guy? He's not some random guy. Elena paused. What was David to her? He's the best person I've ever met. Oh God, you're in love with him, aren't you? Elena, this is insane. Does he even know who you are? No, and I want to keep it that way. You can't keep lying to him forever. What happens when he finds out? What happens when he realizes you've been lying about everything? Elena didn't have an answer for that. It was the question that kept her awake at night. I have to go, Elena said. Elena, wait. Your father is losing patience. If you don't come back voluntarily in the next few days, he's going to make this public. Missing person reports, media coverage, the whole thing. Is that really what you want? Elena hung up and sat on the fire escape for a long time. Through the window, she could see David organizing their tools for tomorrow's appointments. He hummed while he worked, something she'd never heard him do before these past 2 weeks. When she came back inside, David looked at her with concern. Everything okay? You look upset. Just tired, Elena lied. It's been a long day. David walked over and put his hands on her shoulders. The touch was gentle, caring. Elena, I want you to know that whatever happened to you before, whatever you're running from, you're safe here. For as long as you need. Elena felt tears threatening. David thought he was protecting her from some outside danger. He had no idea that the biggest threat to their happiness was Elena herself. David, what if you found out something about me that changed everything? Something that made you see me completely differently? David looked confused. Like what? I don't know, just what if? Elena, I've seen you eat cereal for dinner because we ran out of real food. I've watched you sleep on my couch for 2 weeks without complaining once. I've seen you get excited about fixing a broken phone like it was the most important thing in the world. David smiled. Whatever secrets you think you have, they can't change who you really are. But Elena knew that wasn't true. In 2 days, her father would go public with her disappearance. Her face would be on every news channel, every website, every newspaper. David would learn that the woman he'd been sharing his home with was one of the richest people in the country. And when that happened, Elena was sure she would lose the only real relationship she'd ever had. David was whistling while he organized receipts when the news report started playing on his small TV. He'd left it on for background noise, barely paying attention to the morning show. Our top story today: the search continues for Elena Castellanos, heiress to the Castellanos Industries empire, who disappeared 3 weeks ago under mysterious circumstances. David's hands froze. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. The 26-year-old billionaire was last seen leaving a downtown coffee shop. Her father, CEO Antonio Castellanos, is offering a $10 million reward for information leading to her safe return. A photo flashed on the screen. David's blood turned to ice. It was Elena. His Elena. But this version wore an expensive dress and diamond jewelry. Her hair was professionally styled, and she stood next to a man in a business suit at what looked like some fancy event. Miss Castellanos is the sole heir to the technology fortune estimated at over $4 billion. Police have not ruled out kidnapping, though no ransom demands have been made. David stared at the TV in shock. $4 billion. Elena was worth $4 billion. The front door opened and Elena walked in carrying groceries. She'd gone to the corner market to buy ingredients for lunch. When she saw David's face, the bag slipped from her hands. David, I can explain. Explain what? David's voice came out strangled. Explain how you're actually a billionaire. Explain how you've been lying to me for 3 weeks? Elena looked at the TV screen. where her photo was still displayed. It's not what you think. It's not what I think. David laughed, but there was no humor in it. Elena, you're worth more money than I could make in 100 lifetimes, and you've been pretending to be some confused victim who can't remember her past. I was kidnapped, Elena said desperately. That part was true. I really was chained up in that warehouse. But the memory loss was fake. The confusion about your identity was fake. You knew exactly who you were this whole time. Elena's silence was answer enough. David ran his hands through his hair, pacing the small apartment. Do you have any idea what these past 3 weeks have been like for me? Worrying about paying for extra food, skipping meals so you could eat more, feeling guilty about asking you to help with the business because I thought you were traumatized and vulnerable. David, please. Just let me explain. Explain what? How you thought it would be fun to play poor for a few weeks. How you wanted to see how the other half lives. It wasn't like that. Elena's voice broke. I never meant for it to go this far. At first I was just scared and confused. Then when I saw how kind you were, how different you were from everyone in my world, I wanted to stay. I wanted to see what real life felt like. Real life? David stared at her. You think my life is some kind of experiment? Some game you can play when you get bored of being rich? No! David, these have been the happiest 3 weeks of my life. For the first time ever, someone cared about me for who I am, not what I'm worth. But I don't know who you are, David shouted. Everything you've told me has been a lie. Elena flinched as if he'd slapped her. Not everything. My feelings for you are real. What we built together is real. Is it? How do I know what's real anymore? David picked up his phone. This whole time you could have solved every problem I've ever had with pocket change. You watched me stress about rent money while you probably spend more on lunch than I make in a month. I wanted to help you, but I knew if you found out about the money, everything would change. People always change when they find out. So instead, you decided to lie to me every single day. Before Elena could respond, there was a knock at the door. A very official, very loud knock. David Chen, this is building security. We need to speak with you immediately. David opened the door to find 2 men in expensive suits and a woman with a badge. Behind them stood 3 more people who looked like they could bench press a car. Mr. Chen, I'm Agent Martinez with Private Security. We're here for Miss Castellanos. Elena appeared behind David. How did you find me? Your phone, Miss Castellanos. We've been tracking it for days, waiting for the right moment. The woman stepped forward. Your father is very worried. It's time to come home. I'm not going anywhere, Elena said. Miss Castellanos, with respect, you don't have a choice. Your disappearance has caused significant damage to the company and your family. Mr. Castellanos has been very patient, but the patience has expired. David looked back and forth between Elena and the security team. Wait, so you people knew where she was this whole time? We've known her general location for over a week, Agent Martinez admitted. But Miss Castellanos requested time to resolve her situation privately. Her situation? David felt sick. You mean me? I'm the situation that needed to be resolved. Elena stepped forward. David, that's not how I see you, but that's how they see me. That's how your father sees me. David looked at the security team. Let me guess. Poor guy takes advantage of confused rich girl? Is that the story? Agent Martinez remained professional. Mr. Castellanos would like to thank you personally for keeping his daughter safe. There's a substantial reward waiting for you. A reward? David's anger flared again. You think I helped her for money? Most people do, one of the security guards said quietly. Well, I'm not most people. David turned to Elena. You know what the worst part is? I was falling in love with you, with who I thought you were. But that person doesn't exist, does she? Tears ran down Elena's face. She does exist. I'm still me, David. I'm still the person who helped you with your repairs, who made you coffee in the mornings, who listened to your dreams about having a real shop someday. No. You're Elena Castellanos, billionaire heiress. You probably own companies that make more in a day than I'll see in my lifetime. David's voice got quieter, sadder. We don't live in the same world, Elena. We never did. Agent Martinez stepped forward again. Miss Castellanos, we really do need to leave. Your father is holding an emergency board meeting and your presence is required. Elena looked desperately at David. Come with me, please. We can figure this out together. David almost laughed. Come with you where? To your mansion? To board meetings with billionaires? Elena, look around. This is my world. It's all I know and it's all I can afford. Money doesn't have to matter. Easy to say when you have 4 billion of it. Elena realized she was losing him. She could see it in his eyes. The trust was gone, replaced by hurt and betrayal. David, please. Give me a chance to make this right. How? By telling me more lies? By pretending we're equals when we both know to you? That's impossible. David opened the door wider. Go home, Elena. Go back to your real life. This is my real life. These 3 weeks with you have been more real than anything I've ever experienced. But David had already turned away. Elena looked at him one more time, memorizing his face, then walked out the door with the security team. As the door closed behind them, David slumped against it. His apartment felt enormous and empty without Elena there. For 3 weeks, it had been their home. Now it was just his again, and for the first time since he was a child, David Chen sat down and cried. 3 months had passed since Elena left, and David's life had returned to what it used to be. Sort of. His repair business was still doing well thanks to the reputation they'd built together, but the joy had gone out of it. Every successful repair reminded him of Elena's excited smile when they'd figured out a particularly tricky problem. Every satisfied customer made him remember how proud she'd looked when word spread about their work. David had moved to a slightly better apartment in a safer neighborhood. He could afford it now, but the new place felt empty and cold. He missed the cramped studio where they'd shared coffee in the mornings and worked side by side late into the night. He'd seen Elena on the news a few times. Business conferences, charity events, always in expensive clothes with a polite smile that never reached her eyes. She looked like a different person from the woman who used to fall asleep on his couch after a long day of repairs. On a rainy Tuesday morning, David was opening his new shop when he noticed a familiar figure standing across the street. Elena stood under an umbrella wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of her usual business attire. She looked nervous, uncertain. David's heart jumped, but he forced himself to unlock his door and go inside without acknowledging her. After everything that had happened, what could she possibly want now? An hour later, she walked into his shop. Hi, David. Elena. He didn't look up from the phone he was repairing. I saw you on the news last week. Some big merger announcement. I quit. David's hand stilled. What? I resigned from the company. Gave up my position on the board. Walked away from all of it. Elena stepped closer to his workbench. Well, most of it. I kept enough money to not be completely helpless, but I'm not the heiress anymore. My cousin Roberto is taking over the family business. David finally looked at her. She seemed lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders, but also scared, vulnerable in a way that reminded him of the night he'd found her in that warehouse. Why would you do that? Elena pulled a folded newspaper from her bag and set it on his workbench. The headline read, Castellanos Heiress establishes foundation for small business support. I used most of my inheritance to start this foundation. It provides interest-free loans and business support to people like you. People who are trying to build something honest and meaningful, but can't get help from traditional banks. David scanned the article. The foundation had already helped over 200 small businesses in just 3 months. The focus was on repair shops, family restaurants, and other businesses that served their local communities. This is impressive, David admitted. But why are you telling me this? Because you inspired it. Those 3 weeks with you taught me what really matters. I learned more about business, about life, about myself in your tiny apartment than I did in 26 years of privilege. Elena sat down in the chair across from his workbench, the same way she used to when they worked together. David, I know I hurt you. I know I lied, and I know trust isn't something you can just rebuild with grand gestures, but I had to try to make things right. Elena, what we had was based on a lie. You weren't who I thought you were, wasn't I? Elena leaned forward. The woman who helped you fix electronics, who made you coffee every morning, who fell asleep listening to you talk about your dreams, that was me. The real me, maybe for the first time in my life. David wanted to stay angry, but seeing her like this made his chest ache. You still lied to me every day for 3 weeks. I did, and I've regretted it every single day since. Elena's voice got quieter. David, I've never had a real relationship in my life. Every friend, every boyfriend, every business partner, they all wanted something from me. Money, connections, status. You were the first person who cared about me just because of who I was when no one was watching. So you decided to test me, to see if I was different? No, I decided to be different. For the first time in my life, I got to be just Elena. Not Elena Castellanos, the heiress, just a woman who was grateful to a kind man who saved her life. David set down his tools and really looked at her. The expensive jewelry was gone. Her nails weren't professionally manicured. She looked tired, but also more real than she had in any of those news photos. What do you want from me, Elena? I want to know if there's any chance you could forgive me. If maybe we could start over, but this time with complete honesty. Start over how? You might not be running $1 billion company anymore, but you're still rich. I'm still just a guy who fixes phones for a living. Elena smiled for the first time since she'd walked in. Actually, I was hoping you might need a business partner. She pulled out another set of papers. I've been learning about electronics repair for the past 3 months. Took some courses, practiced on my own. I'm not as good as you yet, but I'm getting better. David looked at the certificates she'd earned. Basic electronics, advanced troubleshooting, small business management. She'd been serious about this. Elena, why would you do all this? Because I want to build something real. Something that matters. And I want to build it with you if you'll let me. Elena's voice shook slightly. I love you, David. Not because you saved me that night, but because you showed me what it feels like to be valued for who I really am. David stared at her for a long moment. Part of him wanted to say yes immediately, but the hurt from her deception was still there. How do I know you won't get bored of this life? What happens when you miss the fancy dinners and the private jets? I never liked those things. I thought I was supposed to, but I didn't. You know what I missed most these past 3 months? Making coffee with you in the morning. Celebrating when we fix something complicated. Falling asleep to the sound of rain on your apartment window. Elena reached across the workbench and gently touched his hand. I know I don't deserve another chance, but if you're willing to try, I promise you'll never have to doubt my honesty again. No more secrets, no more lies. Just us building something together. David looked down at their joined hands. Elena's were softer than his, but she had a small scar on her thumb, from learning to solder electronics. She really had been serious about this. If we do this, he said slowly, we do it as equals. I don't want your charity or your guilt money. Partners. 50-50, everything split down the middle. And if it doesn't work out between us personally, we still have to work together professionally. Can you handle that? Elena squeezed his hand. David, I walked away from $4 billion to be here. I can handle whatever comes next. David was quiet for another moment, then slowly smiled. Well, I guess I could use a business partner. This place has been pretty lonely without someone to argue with about repair techniques. Elena's face lit up with the genuine smile he remembered. Does this mean you forgive me? It means I'm willing to try. But Elena, if you ever lie to me again about anything, we're done. I mean it, I understand. Complete honesty from now on. David stood up and looked around his shop. So, partner, what do you think we should do first? Elena grinned and picked up a broken tablet from his workbench. Let's fix something together. And for the first time in 3 months, David's shop felt like home again.